In the previous video, we had a quick introduction to how the DNS system works. Now let's look at it from a much more practical standpoint and how you would use it when maintaining and operating a web server. Depending on your environment and what you're trying to do, it's quite possible or even probable that you'll be managing your own DNS. For example, if you have a Windows network, Active Directory heavily relies on DNS and provides DNS service for domain members. In fact, AD basically won't run without DNS. And that takes care of DNS for everything on the network. If you have a standalone Windows server, you can still install and run DNS. On Linux, you would install the bind packages. The Berkeley Internet Name Domain System was the first DNS system created for Unix and Unix-like operating systems. It's still heavily in use today and powers many of the DNS servers in the world. In order to use a domain name on the internet, you first must purchase that name from an ICANN-approved registrar or from one of the companies that they have delegated registration to. GoDaddy, Name.com, and Hover are examples of these, but there are several registrars out there. If you purchase web hosting, a lot of providers offer DNS with server packages, but then they control your domain because they handle the registration process and they become the technical contact on your domain. This can become a problem later when you want to change hosting providers, but you have to first get full control of your domain from that provider. Personally, I think it's much better to register your own domain through a registrar and then get your hosting from someone completely different. That way they're separate, and that way it's much easier to change either if you decide you're not happy with them. You can change a web host without too much trouble as long as you control your domain. And if you're okay with your web host, but you don't like your name provider, you can transfer that name to a different provider, and that's fairly easy to do because you don't have to change anything on your web server during that process. There really are better to be separated. In most cases, using managed DNS from a provider is much better than running your own DNS server. DNS servers, especially on Linux, can be very complicated to properly configure and secure. Some domain registrars provide hosted DNS, and some hosting providers will provide that DNS service even if you don't buy your domain through them. Finally, you can outsource and separate all three things by using a provider like DNS Made Easy to operate your DNS, and that would be somebody that's separate from your registrar or your hosting. Using any of these solutions is much easier than maintaining your own DNS server, even if you have a Windows network, because that's going to be a provider more for your internal DNS than for your public-facing information. Here's a screenshot that shows one of my domains. And you'll see from the highlighted spot here that the name servers are the name servers provided by Name.com. When my domain got added to the .com domain zone, it got added with those 4 name servers listed as where to look for further information. Now here's a screenshot of that domain information right from the Name.com web server. As you can see, it's fairly simple to go in and add records for your domains. A records are used for IP4 host addresses, and AAAA records are used to denote IPv6 host addresses. Here you see both address schemes in use because my Linode VPS supports both IPv4 and IPv6. I could have also set up this domain using Linode servers, but because Name.com provides this feature for me, and it's where my domain name is already hosted, this was definitely the easier solution in this case. A friend of mine uses GoDaddy for his domain registration, and he hosts several servers on Linode. Since GoDaddy doesn't offer the same DNS controls, or at least they didn't the last time I checked, in this case it worked out better to use Linode to set up my friend's domain. You'll notice here in the middle that he's using Google for his mail. He's using Gmail for domains to handle all of his mail for his domain. But then his website and other hosts are listed at the bottom, and these addresses are on two different hosting providers, both of which offer IPv6 addresses along with IPv4. In the handout for this lecture, you'll find a list of links for the topics that I talked about in both of the DNS lectures. If you're interested in getting more information, these might be a good place to start. But there is a lot of information on the web about DNS if you go looking. All right, so in this class we have talked about the fact that you can go out and register a domain name to set up your DNS, and I have just purchased this domain from name.com. And so I'm using the default name servers, which are the name.com NS1 through NS4 name servers. I'm just going to come over here now, and I need to add DNS records. So I will start with my IPv4 address for my web server. And I want the whole domain, so I'll leave that first spot blank. Add a record. Now we'll add www and put that in here too. And then I will grab my IPv6 address, and we make AAAA records for that. That goes here, and another one. And we should be pretty close to being able to test this now. And sure enough, default is a blank page. That is the page that I had set up and ready to go for that domain. And that was a successful test.